Hello and welcome back for another little music production and Max for Live tutorial. Today we are discussing the topic of audio clippers, what they are actually doing, what is the difference between hard clipping and soft clipping, and we're gonna have a look at the kHs clipper, which is part of the kHs Essential package, which you can download for free, and we're gonna try to fully recreate its algorithm inside of Max for Live. By loading an instance of the kHs clipper plugin into our plugin doctor, we can see very well what it's actually doing to our signal. When we take the threshold parameter and lower it to around about -12.5 dB, you can see at the amplitude response that our signal will be hard limited right to this value. This process is called hard clipping, so the amplitude can't get any louder than this. Now when we turn up the knee parameter, you can see that there's some kind of smoothing or transition range between our input and the clipped signal value is happening, so the amplitude gets slightly attenuated when it's near the threshold value. Whenever this happens and the waveform is reshaped in another way than just hard clipping, we are using the term soft clipping. By looking at the knee parameter, you can see it has a maximum value of 6.02 dB. This value will become important in the next step. To figure out how our soft clipping function is actually working, I raised the knee parameter to its maximum and started to test some input values. There I figured out that everything from 0.5 or below just gets passed through, and the actual knee function starts on values higher than 0.5. So now we have the starting point of our transition range, now we're looking for the end point. There I noticed that values below 1.5 are still in the attenuation or transition range, so they won't reach the actual threshold value. And input signals from 1.5 or higher actually reach the threshold and can't exceed any louder from there. Now we need to find out how the knee value actually interacts with the start and the end point of our transition range. Now we're getting back to the 6.02 dB value right here, and some of you might know if you reduce a signal by exactly this amount, you basically reduce the amplitude by 50%. So if we multiply it by -1 and translate it to an amplitude value, we get 0.5 as a result. And this is the exact start point of our transition function, as we proved here, and it also relates to the start of the clipping function, which is 2 minus 0.5. Now we test it with another value. We calculate the knee value of 4 dB, which is exactly this amplitude amount. And as you can see here, this is pretty much the starting point of our knee function. And when we hover over to the clipping range, 2 minus the calculated knee amplitude value is where our signal gets clipped. Now we can specify some rules for our soft clipping function. So if the input value is lower than our calculated knee amplitude value, the input is exactly the same as the output. But if our input value is higher than our calculated knee amplitude value, this is the point where our knee function is starting and we have to calculate the right attenuation amount. And when our input signal reaches a value which is 2 minus our calculated knee amplitude or higher, this is the point where our signal gets fully clipped. Now, since we have specified the start and end range of the soft clipping function, I did what every good programmer does and measured some additional points for reference and asked ChatGPT what is all the math behind this stuff. And this is what it came up with. In the upper half you can see the rules we just specified. Y from x is our output value and x is the input. So it returns x if x is equal or lower than our calculated knee amplitude. Then it returns f from x, which is our soft clipping function, if our input value is bigger than knee or lower than 2 minus knee. And it returns 2 minus knee if our input value is equal or bigger than 2 minus knee. So now we have to calculate the f from x function, so our soft clipping stuff. And ChatGPT gave us this formula, which is some kind of cubic function. This is actually pretty easy to implement in Max for Life. And now we are going to have a look on how to do that. The first part of our equation, which we want to translate into Max for Life, is actually the calculated knee amplitude. So we create a live.dial object and name it to knee. Let's give it a range from 0 to 6.0206. Let's give it an initial value of 0, set the unit style to custom, and specify the custom units to dB. Now we create a signal operator, connect it to the first outlet of the live.dial object. Then we multiply it by -1. And then translate it with a dB to A operator into our desired amplitude value. This is our knee variable of our equation. Now we're going to go and calculate the A variable right here. For that, we just subtract 1 from our knee value. Then we multiply our knee value with 2. Connect it right here. Create a reverse subtract operator. And connect it to our multiplicator object. This is actually this part of our equation. And now we just have to multiply it by itself. And divide the left side of our patch by the right side. And now we have calculated our A variable. The next thing we should do is to calculate our f from x function right here. So at first we create a plugin object to get an audio input for our Max for Life device. Let's move it up here to create some space. And then we create a minus operator. Then we connect the left side of our plugin object to the left side of the minus operator and subtract our knee variable from our input value x. Then we create another multiplier object and connect both inlets to our minus operator. And duplicate this. Connect the multiplicators and the other inlet to our A variable. So this is this part of the function, our input value x minus our knee variable, which then got multiplied by itself and multiplied with the A variable. So now we create a plus operator. And we can get the x minus ni value right from our first minus operator right there. Then we duplicate our plus operator again and connect it to our ni variable. We are now done with our f from x function. Now we have to declare our different output scenarios we described earlier. So let's create a selector object with two inlets and connect the left side of our plugin object to the first inlet of the selector. Then we create a less or equal than operator. Move it between plugin and selector object and connect the right inlet to our ni variable. Then we connect the second inlet of the selector directly to our input and the right inlet of the selector to our f from x function. Then we also need to create a +1 operator and connect it right here. That's because of the logic of the selector operator. And why this is needed, you can actually look up in the help file of the selector object. So now the last part of our equation, the clipping. For that, we basically just create a clip object. Just move it right in front of the f from x function. And then we need to create a reverse subtract operator. Give it the value 2. And connect it to our ni variable. And on the other end to the right inlet of our clip operator. Then we create a plug out object, which is the audio output of our Max for Live device. And we can basically just connect it to our selector object. To make it work exactly like the kHz clipper, we actually need some input and output gain variables. So we just copy the live dial, rename it to input, and give it a range from -20 to 20 dB. Then we convert the decibel value to an amplitude value. Create another multiplicator. Connect it to our db2a object and to our plugin object. Then take these patch cords and drag them over there. And then we just duplicate the input gain live dial and db2a object. Also the multiplicator. And do exactly the same for the output gain. Let's drag it to the left side over here to make some space for further patching. And then we duplicate the input dial another time to declare our last parameter, which is the threshold. Rename it. And we set the parameter range from -20 to 6 dB. We also need to convert the decibel value to an amplitude value again. And this threshold function basically is an pre and post gain multiplicator. So we just move it in between these patch chords, duplicate the multiplicator for the output section, and then we connect this multiplicator to the db2a object and apply the inverse of that by reverse dividing by 1 to the input multiplicator. And this is pretty much all the DSP work for our patch. Now, since we only calculated all this stuff for the left input channel, we have to copy all of this to the right input channel also. My computer got a little bit laggy at this point of the tutorial, so I just speed this up a little bit. Here I noticed that I accidentally mixed up the inputs of the selector device. So you have to swap the patch chords from the input and the f from x value right here. Then there's one last thing to do, because our patch is just working with positive values at this moment. So we need to create an absolute operator and connect it to our input stage. This will convert all of our negative values to positive values. Of course, we have to do it on both sides. I actually forgot to connect this multiplier to our threshold parameter right here. And now we have to create something that is called a sine operator, which we don't have natively in Max, but there's some kind of workaround. So we create another multiplicator object, connect it right here before the output gain stage. And we now can just measure whenever our input signal is positive or negative in polarity and apply this to our multiplicators right here at the end. So we create a equal or bigger than operator and declare a 0. So every time when our signal is positive, it will put out a 1. And if it's negative, a 0. But we need a -1 when the signal is less than 0. So we have to multiply it by 2 and subtract 1. Now our output signal gets multiplied by 1 if the input is positive and times -1 if the input is negative. Now we just copy that over to the right channel. Here we do exactly the same. And now the patch should work as expected. I also noticed that I connected the abs operator here to a different part than I did it on the left side. Mathematically, this doesn't make any change, but for optical reasons, I move it just right over here and connect it to the same place as I did it on the left side. Now we're going to do a null test with the original version of the kHz clipper. From the patch we just did, I made a little Max for Live device. I just added some user interface objects, or the rest is totally the same. As you can see, there's one instance of our max patch and one of the original kHz clipper, and we are subtracting the output signals of both of these plugins, and if they are actually the same, there should be a perfect zero output and no audio signal for us to hear. And as you saw with matched signals, we always got a null signal. And this is how you recreate the kHz Clipper plugin in Max for Live. As always, you can download the Max for Live device on my Patreon page. And if you want to support my work so I can do more tutorials and more Max for Live devices, you can become a Patreon member or make a donation via my Gumroad shop. And of course, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, or if you have any further questions or want to get in contact, you can reach out via my socials or message me via email on my website. Until then, I see you in the next tutorial.